Please like, subscribe, and comment. It really helps this channel. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking into a really disturbing case, one that's basically haunted Northern California for decades, the Keddie Cabin Murders.
That's right, April 1981. We're talking about the deaths of Sue Sharp, her son John, his friend Dana Wingate. Horrific.
And the disappearance of Sue's daughter, Tina, who was only 12. That part just adds another layer of mystery.
It really does. And Keddie back then, well, it was this quiet, sort of faded railroad town way up in the Sierra Nevada mountains, pretty remote.
So isolated. The kind of place where you wouldn't expect something like that.
Exactly. That quiet was just shattered. Sue Sharp had moved there fairly recently with her 5 kids, trying to get a fresh start after her divorce, you know?
Right, in Cabin 28. A pretty modest place from what I understand.
Yeah, just seeking some peace, really.
And that night, April 11th, 1981, it started out just like any other Saturday, didn't it?
Pretty much. You know, kids playing outside, neighbors maybe chatting. Normal small-town stuff.
Sue was home with the younger boys, Rick and Greg, and their friend Justin Smartt was there too.
Mm-hmm. And her older daughter, Sheila, she was 14, she'd made plans to sleep over next door at the Seabolt's cabin.
And John, Sue's 15-year-old son, and his friend Dana Wingate, 17. They'd gone out.
Yeah, they'd apparently hitchhiked into the nearby town of Quincy for the evening. Just seemed like a regular night.
Until the next morning, Mother's Day.
Yeah. Sheila comes back to Cabin 28. And she finds, well, it's a scene of unimaginable horror.
The bodies of her mother, her brother John, and Dana Wingate, brutally murdered.
And what's just baffling is, in the next room, the younger boys, Rick, Greg, and Justin Smartt, they're asleep, completely unharmed.
Just sleeping through it all. And then the awful realization that Tina's not there. She's missing.
Vanished.
The whole crime scene is just full of contradictions, isn't it? Like the extreme violence.
Oh, absolutely brutal. Bindings, stabbings, beatings.
But nobody heard anything. And these thin-walled cabins.
It's hard to believe. And no forced entry. Suggests they might have known who came to the door. Or at least didn't see them as a threat initially.
And the weapons. Multiple weapons. A hammer, a steak knife from the kitchen, medical tape used for bindings.
It points towards, well, maybe more than one attacker, and possibly some level of planning. It wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment thing, it seems.
And those poor kids sleeping in the next room?
Yeah.
Oh, it's just chilling.
And then 3 years pass, and part of Tina's remains are found.
Yeah, miles away in Butte County. Her skull, some other bones.
Which just deepens the mystery. What happened to her after she was taken from the cabin?
So that's what we're diving into today. We're going to unpack the facts, look at clues maybe overlooked, the main suspects, and just why this case remains unsolved after all this time.
Okay, so let's piece together that night, April 11th. Sue's home with the little boys and Justin Smartt.
Right. Sheila's planning to stay next door at Cabin 27. John and Dana are off in Quincy. Seems clear enough.
And then Sheila returns Sunday morning, Mother's Day, and finds them.
You mentioned neighbors came into the cabin before the police got everything secured.
Yeah, apparently so. Which, you know, from an investigative standpoint, that's not good. The scene could easily have been compromised.
Definitely. And the state of the victims? It tells a story of just sheer brutality.
It does. Sue was bound with medical tape and electrical cord, gagged, stabbed multiple times. John, his throat was cut. Dana was strangled, beaten badly.
They found a bent steak knife, right? And a claw hammer.
Yes. The bent knife really speaks to the force used. Just incredible violence.
And yet, feet away, the back bedroom, the kids are asleep, undisturbed.
It's one of the most baffling parts of the whole thing. Did they somehow sleep through it? Were they drugged? We just don't know.
And Tina, she disappears. Her stuff is still in her room. The front door is slightly open.
Yeah, no obvious signs of a struggle in her room, but she's just gone. Was she taken? Did she flee in terror? Was she even there when it started?
And it seems like the initial police response, maybe they didn't treat her disappearance as urgently as they should have.
Looking back, it feels like a critical error. That focus on her being missing, potentially abducted, maybe wasn't prioritized immediately. A lost window of opportunity, perhaps.
Then you have the forensic details. No robbery, apparently.
Right. Doesn't seem like the motive was theft.
But the blood spatter suggested a long, violent struggle inside the cabin.
Definitely. It wasn't quick, and the phone, taken off the hook, cord cut.
Deliberate, to stop anyone calling out.
Exactly. And the multiple weapons again. Some from the cabin, like the knife, but maybe the hammer was brought. They found another hammer later, didn't they?
We'll get to that. But yeah, it suggests planning, premeditation,
So you have this compromised crime scene right off the bat, neighbors potentially walking through.
Big problem. And the lack of forced entry. That's huge, isn't it?
It really points towards the victims knowing their attackers, or at least feeling safe enough to open the door. Narrows the focus, you know?
Right. To people they knew. Acquaintances, maybe even neighbors.
And the different ways they were killed. Binding Sue, strangling Dana, stabbing, bludgeoning. It does make you think maybe more than one person was involved.
Yeah, it feels like too much maybe for one person to control and carry out using different methods like that.
Could be. And that phone off the hook? Classic move to isolate victims. Total control inside that cabin was the aim.
Okay, let's talk about Justin Smartt, the little boy who was staying over. He saw things, didn't he? Or recalled things later.
Yes, this is a really complex and potentially crucial part of the investigation. Justin, through hypnosis sessions later and maybe some initial statements, described seeing two men.
And his descriptions apparently matched Martin Smartt, his own father, and another man, Bobu Bede, who was staying with the Smarts.
That's the claim. He also recalled seeing Sue being attacked and, critically, seeing Tina being led away by these men.
Wow, that's potentially an eyewitness account right there. Was it taken seriously enough at the time?
It's debated. Child testimony, especially retrieved through hypnosis, can be tricky legally. But his account contained details, like the men's appearances, that seem to align with other information. It feels like maybe the initial investigation didn't dig into it as deeply as they could have. Maybe some disorganization or just uncertainty about how to handle a child witness in that state.
And there were all sorts of theories flying around early on, right? Drugs, sexual assault.
Oh, yeah. All kinds of speculation. Drugs were often mentioned in the area. Some thought maybe it was a deal gone bad, but there wasn't much concrete evidence for that involving the Sharps. Attempted sexual assault was another theory. Even early whispers of a cover-up started circulating.
It just shows how confusing it all was, and that delay in really focusing on Tina being missing, not just unaccounted for.
That's a big point. Every hour counts when a child disappears. The FBI getting involved later suggests maybe the local team was a bit overwhelmed or didn't have the specific resources for that abduction angle right away.
Then, 3 years later, 1984, Camp 18. A bottle collector finds human remains.
Yeah, grim discovery. Tina's partial skull, bits of her jawbone, vertebrae. Also found nearby were things like a child's blanket, a blue jacket, jeans, and crucially, an empty surgical tape dispenser.
Surgical tape?
Yeah.
Like the medical tape used to bind Sue.
Exactly. A potential link between the cabin and where Tina ended up, and Camp 18. It's about 60 miles from Keddie. Pretty remote, rugged area.
Not somewhere you just happen upon. Suggests a deliberate effort to hide her body.
Definitely. And the state of the remains, skeletal after 3 years, meant they couldn't determine her cause of death, another frustrating dead end, forensically.
This brings us squarely to the prime suspects, or at least persons of interest early on. Martin Smartt and Bobu Bede.
Right. Martin Smartt lived next door, cabin 26. He knew the Sharps. His son, Justin, was in cabin 28 that night, and he apparently had a bit of a temper.
And Bobu Bede. Who was he?
John Bobu Bede was staying with Martin Smartt at the time. He wasn't local, had a pretty extensive criminal record, apparently some alleged ties to organized crime figures elsewhere.
Interesting. And he just left Keddie shortly after the murders.
Vanished, yeah. That's always looks suspicious.
And Martin's wife, Marilyn, she had things to say, didn't she? About Martin and Sue Sharp.
She did. Marilyn claimed that Sue had actually been advising her, Marilyn, to leave Martin because of his temper or behavior, and that Martin really resented Sue for interfering.
Okay, so that provides a possible motive, right?
Yeah.
Resentment, anger.
It's a potential interpersonal motive, yes. Adds a layer of tension there. And then there's the alleged confession Martin supposedly made.
The one to the therapist at the VA hospital in Reno.
That's the story. Reportedly, Martin admitted some involvement in the murders to his therapist, and crucially, he apparently mentioned Tina being taken before her remains were found, before it was widely known she'd been abducted.
And the therapist reported this.
Yes, the therapist reportedly did contact authorities, but it seems like, well, not much happened with that information at the time, which is deeply troubling if true.
Unbelievable. Then there's the hammer. Martin supposedly owned a specific type of hammer, a claw hammer, that went missing around the time of the murders.
Correct. And years later, in 2016, investigators actually found a hammer matching that description in a pond near Keddie.
Did they link it definitively?
Testing was ultimately inconclusive, unfortunately. Couldn't get DNA or a solid forensic match after all that time underwater, but the timing and location are certainly suggestive. Keep that suspicion pointed towards him.
And Justin Smartt's accounts again. His descriptions under hypnosis, maybe even his nightmares. They pointed to Martin and Bo.
His descriptions of the two men he saw attacking Sue and taking Tina consistently resembled his father, Martin, and Bo Bobade. Again, the reliability of hypnosis is debated, but the consistency is noted.
What about polygraphs? Did they test Martin and Bo?
They did. Reports suggest the results were inconclusive. There have even been allegations that the tests might have been poorly administered or perhaps even deliberately manipulated to avoid clear results.
So not helpful. And their stories didn't match up either, Martin and Bo.
Their statements reportedly had inconsistencies, and Marilyn Smartt apparently contradicted Martin's alibi for the night of the murders, more red flags that don't seem to have been aggressively pursued.
But the letter Martin wrote to Marilyn seems like the most explosive piece of evidence that was potentially ignored.
It's astounding. The quote often cited is, "I've paid the price for your love, and now that I've bought it with 4 people's lives, you tell me we are through. Great. What else do you want?"
4 people's lives.
Yeah.
I mean, how could that not trigger a massive investigation?
Exactly. Yet, according to reports and later investigations, no significant action seems to have been taken based on that letter back then. It's one of the biggest criticisms of the original investigation, this piece of potential evidence just sitting there.
It really paints a picture of an investigation that failed, doesn't it? Key suspects with motives, questionable alibis, potential confessions, physical evidence links like the hammer, and they were never charged.
Both Martin Smartt and Bo Bobade died years later without ever facing charges for the Keddie murders. It feels like a profound failure to follow through on very strong leads.
Okay, so let's recap Tina's discovery. April 1984, Camp 18, the bottle collector finds her skull.
Right. And the other items, the blanket fragment, the jacket, jeans, that surgical tape dispenser, a grim collection confirming she was likely taken there after being killed.
In that location, 60-plus miles away, remote.
Yeah.
A deliberate concealment.
Definitely not a place you'd easily find. Someone knew that area or chose it specifically for its remoteness.
Yeah, the anonymous phone call. That's really intriguing. Shortly after the skull was found, but before it was public knowledge.
Yeah, someone called the Butte County Sheriff's Office. The caller apparently said something like, "The skull found might be Tina Sharp's." They knew before it hit the news.
Did they trace the call?
They traced it to a payphone, but the caller was never identified. Who was it? Someone involved, someone who heard something. It's a massive unanswered question.
It fuels speculation, doesn't it? Did this person know more? Why call anonymously?
It implies knowledge, certainly. Maybe guilt, fear. We just don't know.
And the idea that Tina might have been alive for some time after the murders in the cabin?
It's a chilling possibility raised by her being missing for 3 years. Was she held captive? What horrors might she have endured? We have no evidence either way, but the time frame allows for that awful speculation.
But forensically, from the remains, they couldn't tell much. Cause of death, timeline.
No, skeletal remains after 3 years in the elements. It's very difficult. No soft tissue, cause of death, often indeterminable unless there's obvious trauma to the bone itself, which apparently wasn't the case here.
So the theories about why she was taken, maybe she was a witness they needed to silence.
That's a strong possibility. If she saw the attackers, saw what happened to her family, taking her would eliminate a witness.
Or was she a target for some other, some part of some power dynamic or something darker related to one of the attackers?
Also possible. Without knowing the full motive for the initial attacks, it's hard to say why Tina specifically was taken, other than the obvious witness angle.
And DNA tech back in '84. Pretty limited compared to now.
Absolutely. If those remains were found today, there'd be a much greater chance of extracting useful DNA evidence, potentially even identifying trace evidence from an attacker. But back then, the technology just wasn't there.
It feels like so many pieces were there. Martin's letter, Bo's inconsistencies, Justin's account, but they just weren't put together effectively by the first investigators.
That seems to be the consensus looking back. Key information was overlooked or not given the weight it perhaps deserved.
And after Tina's remains were found, the case just sort of went cold again.
Pretty much. It felt like a dead end. For the surviving family, that must have been devastating. Like the system just gave up.
Until Sheriff Greg Hagwood came along in Plumas County around 2008. He had a personal connection, right?
Yeah, he knew some of the people involved back in the day, lived in the area. He made it a priority to reopen the case, take a fresh look with fresh eyes, and importantly, modern techniques.
That must have brought some hope. What did they do?
They started digitizing the old files, re-interviewing people where possible, and crucially, re-examining physical evidence with modern forensic capabilities.
Cabin 28 itself was torn down eventually, wasn't it, in 2013?
It was kind of symbolic, maybe, but the focus shifted to the evidence they still had.
Did the renewed forensic testing yield anything concrete besides finding that hammer in the pond?
The hammer was suggestive but inconclusive. The really big news came in 2018.
The DNA.
Exactly. They announced they had found new DNA evidence, specifically on a piece of the tape used to bind one of the victims, and this DNA was matched to a living male suspect.
A living suspect. After all this time, that's huge.
Potentially game-changing. The first concrete forensic link to a specific living individual.
Why hasn't there been an arrest? It's been years since that announcement.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The sheriff's office has been very tight-lipped. There could be lots of reasons. Maybe the suspect lives out of state, creating jurisdictional hurdles. Maybe the DNA is only on the tape and they need more to prove he was involved in the murders themselves. Building a prosecutable case after 40-plus years with potentially compromised evidence and deceased witnesses is incredibly difficult.
Right. It's not just about having a DNA match. You need a whole case you can take to court.
Precisely. And maybe there's a reluctance, given the past failures, to move forward unless the case is absolutely ironclad.
It makes you wonder, though, if that initial investigation hadn't been so flawed.
If they'd pursued Smartt and Boobied more aggressively, tested evidence properly back then, things could be very different. Sheriff Hagwood himself has voiced deep frustration about how the original case was handled.
So they have this digital case file now. They're working with true crime researchers sometimes. They're still trying.
Yes, the commitment seems to be there now. They have a profile, likely a personal attack. Killers knew the victims. Tina was taken, probably as a witness, and others might know things but kept silent out of fear.
But that living suspect? The silence around their identity is deafening.
It is very frustrating for the public and especially the families.
And the public interest is still huge, right? Documentaries, podcasts like this one. People haven't forgotten Keddie.
Not at all. It's a case that really sticks with you. The brutality, the mystery, the sense of injustice.
Yeah, this whole saga just screams justice delayed. That feeling of betrayal for the families must be immense.
Absolutely. Decades of waiting for answers.
Which leads to the darker question. Was it just incompetence back then? Or was there something more? Obstruction? Maybe.
That theory has always lingered, especially around Beau Beaubeard, his criminal past, those alleged ties to organized crime. It fuels speculation.
And the claims he might have had some connection to law enforcement, maybe even federal agencies.
Yeah, there have been whispers, even some claims from former investigators, suggesting Beau might have been an informant, maybe for the FBI, and that perhaps investigators were subtly warned off looking too closely at him.
An informant. So, potentially protected.
It's a theory. If true, it could explain why someone with his background, who left town right after the murders, wasn't pursued more aggressively. Maybe authorities didn't want to open that can of worms, so to speak. It's all speculation, but it persists.
If you factor that possibility in, it adds another potential layer to Tina's abduction too. Was she taken because she saw something related to that?
It opens up possibilities beyond just witnessing the attack on her family. If there were other criminal elements involved, who knows?
So motives. We've got the personal resentment from Martin towards Sue. Potential for drug involvement, though evidence seems weak. Abuse. Martin's temper. Beau's history.
Revenge for Sue advising Marilyn. All these threads exist. It feels personal somehow, not random.
And the internet sleuths. They've really picked this case apart over the years, haven't they?
They have. Sometimes highlighting inconsistencies or asking questions that push the investigation. That anonymous call about Tina's remains is something they often focus on.
Right. Who made it? What do they know?
And Sheila Sharp, Sue's surviving daughter, and other family members, they've consistently criticized the original investigation. They believe the killers were known, maybe even protected.
Their voices are so important here. They lived it.
Absolutely. Their perspective adds weight to the suspicion that the full story hasn't come out, that maybe someone knew or knows and chose silence.
It leaves you wondering if there was a bigger picture, a conspiracy of silence, if not outright corruption.
The lingering suspicion is strong, that maybe the truth involves more than just the killers themselves.
The impact on Keddie, that small town,
Okay.
it must have been devastating. losing that sense of safety, that trust.
Absolutely. A crime this brutal in a tiny, remote community leaves scars that last generations. The lack of resolution just compounds that.
And for the surviving children, Sheila, Rick, Greg, and the families of John Sharp and Dana Wingate, the pain is ongoing. This isn't just a cold case file.
No, it's a continuing tragedy for them, a reminder of elusive justice.
The big question just hangs there. Why? Why has no one ever been truly held responsible for this?
It points to failures, certainly, whether mistakes, negligence, or something worse. The result is the same, justice denied.
It feels almost certain that someone alive today knows more than they've said, someone carrying that secret.
That's a heavy burden to carry for over 40 years.
If investigators are still working on it, right? There's still that possibility of a breakthrough. The DNA match is still out there.
Hope remains. New technology, a deathbed confession, someone finally deciding to talk. It could still happen.
And that's why we talk about these cases. We want to address you, the listener, directly. If anything about this story sparks a memory, if you heard something back then or know anything, even if it seems small,
please contact the Plumas County Sheriff's Office in California. Even a tiny detail could be the missing piece they need.
Because until someone speaks the full truth, the echoes of what happened in Cabin 28, the screams, they won't fade.
They really won't. A haunting case.
Please like, subscribe, and comment. It really helps this channel.